Steve Cassidy here. I want to go through today a little example of writing a little bit of JavaScript with a bit of an emphasis on how we're going to structure JavaScript applications, how we're going to put together JavaScript projects, because I want to sort of lay out a bit of a template for how these things put together so we can sort of try and keep them organized and follow a few of the rules of good practice for for JavaScript authoring. So I've got a new project here in PyCharm, and I've created a few things. One is this index.html file, which is just going to be my target HTML. So we're not doing Python just now, we're just doing JavaScript coding. So I just need my HTML file. It's going to be my target page, and then I've got a script.js file. So I've created a static folder and a script.js file. So we might serve this in the normal way. So what we're going to do is just to write a very simple bit of JavaScript to modify this page. I'm just going to insert some content at this page. So the first thing I'm going to enter here is a little placeholder that is going to be where I place my content. So I'm going to have a content div, which is going to be empty in this initial HTML page that I serve, but which my JavaScript code is going to fill up. So that's going to be my target. Let's go to the script file now. Now I'm going to use a style of writing JavaScript, which I'll explain. I'm going to define a function with no arguments, and that's going to be an anonymous function. You can see the notes for a bit of an explanation of this. This is an anonymous function, so it doesn't have a name. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call this function. So I'm going to put these round brackets at the end of this. So this is defining a function and immediately calling that function. If we sort of drop the line there, you can sort of see it maybe a bit better. So we define a function here and then immediately call that function. And so that essentially has the effect of evaluating all of the stuff inside that function straight away. So if I put console log hello inside this function, then if we executed this file, that would be executed. Let's try that and so see how it happens. So let's put our script tag in the HTML file. Now you notice I'm putting the load of the script tag at the end of the file. Now, this is best practice at the moment with JavaScript and in your HTML. If you put it at the beginning of the file, then what happens is that the browser pauses to load your JavaScript as it gets to it, and it executes the JavaScript straight away. So if you put it up here, it would have paused and waited and executed your JavaScript. Now in this case it's not going to do a great deal, but if your JavaScript is actually quite big and involved, that can take a time and it will slow down the page load. So what we do is we put it at the end of the page, and then the other advantage is that right at the end here all of the page has been loaded already, and so we can actually start accessing the page as well if we want. So I'm going to load my JavaScript in here. It's going to load this, and basically what's going to happen, it should just log hello to the console, right? Because it's loading this file, it's defining a function and calling it straight away. It just defines all of these things. Now the reason for doing this is so that we don't create objects in global scope. So JavaScript has one scope, which is one global scope, which is the browser, the context of the browser, and any function you define goes into that scope. And we want to avoid polluting that scope, putting things in there that we don't want. This comes in more important when we're using lots of different modules in JavaScript. JavaScript doesn't really have a very good way natively of keeping programs separate, keeping modules separate, like Python does with its module system. JavaScript doesn't have that. So we have to use mechanisms like this to sort of get around that. This is one way to work around that. Okay, so we want to see if this works. So let's view our page in the browser. And here it is. So let me just make it a bit smaller so it fits within my window. Okay, so I'm viewing the page in my browser and it doesn't look like anything, does it? But it is viewing that page. So if I go now to my console, I should see here hello. So let me clear that. So if I refresh this page, navigate to there, and hello, there's my little message. So my JavaScript has been executed. You can see that if we go to the network tab, the script.js file has been executed, or loaded and executed, and let's run. So this is our sort of pattern, if you like, for writing JavaScript in a sort of safe way in this module. This is not going to corrupt the rest of the code. Now what I want to do is I want to insert some content into here. This is just a little exercise. Really, the main thing I'm interested in is this overall structure and how we set these things up. So I'm going to define a function, and I'm not writing Python. There you go, I'm starting to write Python. I'm not writing Python, so I'm going to say function add content, and it's not going to take any arguments, and it's going to basically add some content. So what the first, it's going to add some stuff into here. So the first thing I've got to do is find this element. So I want a variable, call it target equals, and then document. So document is the root of our document object model. Get element by ID, and the ID is content. Okay, so we've got this tag here and it's got an ID of content, so get element by ID. Remember, IDs have to be unique, and so this is going to return one target. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this. So let's say target.inner HTML equals, and let's say, there you go, so there's a little header that we can insert. So now my code will do this. Now all I need to do is arrange for this to be called. When should I call this? Well, I could call it here like that, and that would execute that just after it's defined it. But quite often what we want to do, well, one of the things we want to make sure of is that we don't run these scripts until the browser has finished rendering the page. And when the browser's finished rendering the page, it issues an event. JavaScript is an event-driven language inherently, so things happen in response to events, whether it's the user clicking, or the page finishing, loading, etc. So what we want to do is we want to make it that when the window has loaded, so we're going to set the window on load handler to add content. So when the window is finished loading, it will essentially call this function, and that will execute our little bit of code. So there's my sort of installation of my little handler to be run when the window is finished loading. Now, of course, this assumes, and this is not really the right thing to do, that I'm the only thing that ever wants to do that. We'll see some other ways to be more permissive like that later, but for now this will work for our little example. So now let's have a look at what happens in here. If I refresh the page, I get my header of all the things. So the elements in the page, we can see now we have the content div, and inside that div we got all the things header. So this is good. So let's go a little bit further. Let's add some stuff to this. Let's write a for loop. For loop in JavaScript is a bit like one in Java or C++, and I is less than 10 and I++. So we have a variable I. Notice we don't declare what type I is, we just say, but we do have this variable, this var declaration that makes sure that it's not trying to reference a global variable, it makes a new local variable. And I'm just going to say inner HTML plus equals, which means append to the current content. I'm just going to add, let's say, a paragraph here, thing number, and then plus I plus end the paragraph. Okay, so I'm just adding thing number 1, thing number 2, thing number 3 to the content there. Let's have a look at what that does. Ta-da-da! There you go. So we now have thing number 1, thing number 2, thing number 3, and so on. So that's just a little bit of JavaScript. The purpose of this is to sort of show you this structure. We're loading, we have this sort of markup thing here. We're loading the file at the end, the script file at the end, and we're wrapping the JavaScript code in this anonymous function that's immediately called. And we'll see a few variations on this, but this is something that we'll see, and that really means that this function here doesn't go into global scope. It's not defined, so it doesn't get in the way of any other add content routine that some other module might define. Okay, so there's my simple example. Thank you.